Okay, so this says for what values of x is the f of x greater than 0. So it's basically saying for what x inputs, for what values of x could you input to this function and get an output that's greater than 0, right? For what values of x, for what input values of x are you going to plug in and get an output, f of x, that's greater than 0? Well, a graph is a visual depiction of the inputs versus the outputs. For instance, when you input a value of -1 into the -3 into the function, you get an output of 5. So when you input -3, you get an output of 5. So when you input -3, you do get a output that's greater than 0. Okay. When you input -2, however, you get an output that is exactly 0. So this one does not work, right? -2 does not work. When you input -1, you get an output of -3. Again, so an input of -1 does not produce an f of x value greater than 0.
Mrs. Chariot, please call the main office. Mrs. Chariot, please call the main office.
You heard that, Mrs. Chariot. If you're watching this video, please call the main office. So -1 does not work. 0 gives an output of -4. That doesn't work. And so we can see that this graph gives us a visual depiction of, for all the x inputs, what are the outputs? Clearly, any x inputs in this range, from here to here, are going to give outputs less than 0. And anything past here are going to give outputs greater than 0. We want the x values that give outputs greater than 0. And we can see from the graph that the only ones that are going to work are things that are greater than 2. So any x values greater than 2 are going to give outputs greater than 0, and any x values less than -2. So that's my answer there. Any x values less than -2 or any x values greater than 2 are going to give us outputs that are bigger than 0. 2 doesn't work. We can't put equal to here because -2 produces an output that's exactly 0. We want them to be greater than 0. So those are our answers.